Well, good morning. My name is Paula Huntley, and I am the Managing Director of the Center for International Business Education and Research here at Georgia State. And today I'm pleased to introduce to you Mr. Alan DuBose, who is a Foreign Service Officer at the U.S. Department of State. He is a diplomat in residence at Spelman College here in Atlanta, Georgia. Diplomats in residence are career foreign service officers who provide guidance and advice on careers, internships, and fellowships to students and professionals. During his 14 years of experience at the U.S. Department of State, Mr. DuBose served overseas as Vice Consul in Mexico, General Service Officer in Ecuador, and Management Officer in Dubai. Prior to joining the Foreign Service, Mr. DuBose enjoyed a 20-year career that included positions in finance at corporations like IBM and Digital Equipment Corporation. Alan, welcome, and thank you so much for joining us today.
And thank you for having me. Can everybody hear me okay?
Yes.
All right, so welcome everybody. Again, my name is Alan DuBose and I'm the diplomat in residence South. There are 16 diplomats in residence who are with the U.S. Foreign Service, and we're spread out with regional locations across the United States. So I work with students or candidates who may have already graduated and they're out in the work world anywhere in Alabama, Georgia, or Tennessee. So with that, I'm going to go straight into the presentation and hopefully things will go well. I'll go through the presentation for probably about around a half hour to 45 minutes, and then we will go into our Q&A. So can you please let me know, give me a thumbs up if you can see full screen, or just say yes.
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 All right, so now here we go. I'm just trying to move with technology, move stuff out of the way. Okay, here we go. So you're going to hear me say over and over, like in the bottom left-hand corner, careers.state.gov. 80 to 90% of what comes out of my mouth today, you can find this information at careers.state.gov. So it's an excellent, excellent resource of information. You'll also hear from time to time usajobs.gov. usajobs.gov is the website that is used for federal government jobs. Please ignore that noise in the back. That's my dog. In any case, so usajobs.gov is the portal that is used for applying for jobs or careers with the entire federal government. What I always tell applicants to do is go through careers.state.gov when you see an opportunity and choose that, and they'll take you straight to the announcement on usajobs.gov. But if you go straight to usajobs.gov, then you have to search through everything to find that. So again, my name is Alan DuBose. I'm the diplomat in residence South. What we're going to be talking about today is the role of the U.S. Department of State and the U.S. Foreign Service, just so that's clarified. Then we'll talk about U.S. Foreign Service careers and some of the motivations people join, student programs, and then go on to our Q&A. So what is the mission? Well, the U.S. State Department leads America's foreign policy abroad. So essentially, the key point is abroad. The U.S. Foreign Service via the U.S. Department of State speaks for the White House or is the official spokesperson for the U.S. government abroad. Domestically, we don't really have any authorities there, but overseas, we are considered the umbrella organization as far as our authorities. So what that means is there are other agencies that may send people to work abroad, but normally they fall under our umbrella of responsibility. So who and where are we? Well, the Department of State was the first federal agency that was started in 1789. Around 1924, through the Foreign Service Act, they realized that there were certain roles and functions that were dedicated to being abroad. So they started cobbling together these specific functions and created the U.S. Foreign Service. So think of it this way. everybody who is an employee of the U.S. Foreign Service, the diplomatic corps, is part of the Department of State. However, everybody who is an employee of the Department of State is not part of the Foreign Service. Those other people who are not part are what we call our civil servants mostly, or we'll go through what locally employed staff are as well. We're headquartered in Washington, D.C., and we have special purpose offices spread throughout the entire United States, like passport agencies, or what's called our Office of Foreign Missions, offices that deal with other countries' consulates that are in the United States. We have 276 posts abroad spread across 191 countries. If you do the math real quickly, you see it's not one-to-one. And the reason is because when we establish ourselves abroad, we normally start with an embassy. And so it may be Embassy Brasilia, and it's Mission Brazil. So that would mean it would include consulates in places like Rio de Janeiro or Sao Paulo or Porto Alegre. So in certain areas, certain countries, you'll find that we have consulates that report into that embassy, and that embassy reports into DC. We have approximately 77,000 employees, but that's a little deceptive. We actually only have about 14,000 foreign service employees, about 10,000 civil service employees, and the civil service employees are the ones, again, doing their work mostly in the States in support of the Foreign Service. And abroad, we have locally employed staff. So the majority of our employees are actually staff who may or may not be American citizens who are abroad, and they're hired by that embassy or consulate. And they're very important to us because they are our archival knowledge, and they are the people who do a lot of the hands-on work, and they also have to get us up and going. So when a diplomat goes abroad, lands at the airport, we don't even know where the bathroom is. So the LES are very, very important to not only acquaint us with that, where we're going to be living, but they're also introducing us to many of the people we need to get to know in that country. Now we're going to talk about some of the career options, which are basically broken into two categories of diplomats: the Foreign Service Specialists and the Foreign Service Officers. All right, so these are, again, both considered diplomats, but they have different general roles. Foreign Service Specialists are subject matter experts. They serve their entire career normally in their area of expertise. This is contrasted with Foreign Service Officers, who we call generalists. They do have career roles, but they're expected as much as possible to be plug and play, and they're actually required to serve part of their career doing something other than whatever their career track is. You'll hear me probably use the term generalist more than I do officers, just to avoid any confusion. So let's talk first about the Foreign Service Specialist career tracks. So these are people who, when they're hired, they're brought in with the assumption that they already have certain education or work experience skills. So the administrative roles are a broad category of the types of jobs you'd find in the private community. So this can include human resources officers, finance, it would include what we call logistics people or general services. So these are our administrative people. Construction engineering. This is actually an area we have a shortage because nobody thinks about us when we're talking about construction engineers, project managers, construction management, civil engineers, architects. They all may fall in this category because someone has to build those embassies and consulates we have spread across the world. Facility management. Facility managers are just as important. After the buildings and grounds are built, someone has to maintain them, and these are our facility managers. Information technology is one where we have our greatest shortage because, again, people don't think of us for information technology, but we actually have some very challenging jobs for IT professionals for two reasons. One is because they have to deal with the security aspect that's associated with communicating with IT abroad, many times in a home country. And the other is because when we send our personnel overseas in the Foreign Service, they are expected to supervise on their first assignment and going forward. They may or may not, but they should be expected to be supervising. It costs Uncle Sam somewhere between $700,000 and $800,000 normally for a 3-year tour to send one of our people abroad. So our IT professionals rarely get involved in the hands-on work. They're supervisors, managers, and they have to be able to communicate techie stuff many times to people whose eyes gloss over whenever you say anything about tech. So they're not just straight technical people, they are more operations oriented, but they must understand the technical side. We have a small cadre of international information English language programs. These are people who are posted abroad and really trying to share information about the US and the US government abroad. Medical and health. Yes, we have our medical providers who are abroad, many times in regional capacities, meaning that we may have nurses and doctors and psychiatrists who are posted in one country, and then usually the MD and the psychiatrist would have responsibility for traveling throughout that region. Office management, pretty much self-explanatory. These are the clerical roles. And then the last group is law enforcement and security, and no one knows it by this name, but if anybody watches movies, they'll hear something about diplomatic security or DS. And these are our special agents, and they also have certain positions that are more technically oriented, cybersecurity oriented, that they're responsible for. So they're responsible for anything security oriented at post. So we talked about the specialists, and again, when these people are hired in, the expectation is the specialists are going to have a certain expertise in that career field already, or minimum education in that career field. And then they will probably be doing their total 20-year plus career in that area. This is contrasted to our Foreign Service officers, again, what we call the generalists. Let's talk about consular first. Consular are the people who do two broad things. One is they take care of US citizens in that country. So if Alan goes to France, loses his passport, and I need emergency help, the person who's probably going to help me is going to be a consular officer. The other major role is issuing visas to people who want to enter the United States. So let's say there's a student in a certain country who wants to study at Georgia State. Well, they would have to go talk to a consular officer and get a visa issued to give them certain responsibilities and permissions to enter. I'm going to skip over economic and go to management. And that's what I am. I'm a management officer. And this little image here, it looks like a management officer. Normally, when we're at post, we are responsible for the largest number of personnel. I think I had 77 people reporting to me when I was in Dubai as management officer. It doesn't mean we're more important. It just means that most of those specialist positions report through management. Management is the closest thing that you're going to find to the private world. It's actually very close to the jobs you're going to find in the private world. And so it's just very labor intensive. They handle everything from what we already talked about to finding houses, getting the students in school, getting things paid for, shipping your car back and forth or your effects. So management is everything administrative. Let's go down to public diplomacy. I call the face of the US Foreign Service, and that's because they are the face. So if you're abroad and you see someone speaking on TV or on the internet, there's a good chance that they are a PD officer. They're also the ones who interface with the local journalistic community. They're putting the information out there about what US policy is in the public realm. Economic and political, I always lump them together and they hate when I do that. They are what we call reporting officers. So economic officers report about economic issues, political about political issues. So when people look at TV or movies and they think of a classic diplomat, this is really what they're talking about. These are the ones who have to insert themselves into that community, whatever country they're in, and really get to know what's going on. They are the ones who meet with the high-level officials normally in that local government. They also work with movers and shakers in the private world when they're overseas as well. So the US Department of State Foreign Service gathers intelligence. It's just that the type of intelligence we gather is normally open source, meaning it's out there for anybody, or it's human, which is human intelligence, which is just like it sounds. They go talk to human beings. and they gather this information. But this information, then they report back to Washington, and this is how the information flows back and forth. In DC, if a decision is made at the highest levels, they will consult with Post, but ultimately DC makes the final decisions. And they will say to Post, okay, here's the message we want delivered in that country. And it's normally up to the economic or political officers to deliver that message once it's decided what that message is going to be. If it's a high enough level message, then it may be the ambassador, but normally it's political and economic officers at their level who communicate with the local governments. So let me go back for 1 sec to make one point. I talked about the specialists having to have certain skills or education. Generalists don't. Believe it or not, generalists don't have to have a college degree. Now, I think I heard a statistic somewhere around 70% of our generalists actually have master's degrees or higher, but because it's a very academically oriented environment. But when it comes to the requirements, you can major in biology, and I've known people who majored in music and biology and some things you would never think of, and they have become management, PD, political, consular officers. So how do we decide who we're going to bring in as a generalist if we're not even requiring them to have a certain education in a certain field? And the answer is we're evaluating them all through the process by what we call our 13 dimensions. These 13 dimensions are listed here, and I encourage you to go to careers.state.gov to go into more detail. What I will say is, though officially none are more important than the other, my experience has taught me there are 3 that stand out. One of them has to do with leadership. Again, we are expected to supervise at any given moment, which means we have to have leadership skills. While the Foreign Service Institute, which is our school, 70-acre campus in Arlington, Virginia, while we teach courses on all these things you see here, the expectation is that in order to be hired, the candidate needs to have already demonstrated strong leadership skills. Cultural adaptability. This, in simplest terms, means how do you adapt to an environment that's different? So it could be a domestic environment, but we're really talking about overseas. If you are the best at doing whatever it is you do, making widgets, if you're the best widget maker in Atlanta, if we pick you up and take you to Madrid, are you going to succeed or are you going to crash and burn? Are you going to say, they do it differently here? I don't know. This isn't like we do it in Atlanta. Or are you going to say, oh, this is different. Okay, let me figure out how to do it and get it done. That's what we call cultural adaptability. And of course, judgment is the overarching thing. We never have perfect information. There are 270 some posts. We can't have perfect information. So what the people have to do at Post is they have to exercise excellent, strong, professional judgment that makes sense, that they can defend when things go wrong, and they will go wrong. So let's talk about the hiring process. This looks complicated, but it's really not. You can find this at careers.state.gov. To hire a generalist, it starts with taking the Foreign Service Officer test through a private testing service called Pearson VUE. This test is computerized, basically written, and what they do is they have you submit what's called a personal narrative, and then you have to do some writing as well as multiple choice. If people pass the FSOT, and normally somewhere between 50 to 55% may pass at any given time, the information goes to the qualifications evaluation panel. And these are real human beings who sit there and they basically say, okay, we're going to see these people who pass, who are we going to choose to go on to our interview stage? And we don't call it an interview because we're the US government, we call it an oral assessment. So they will invite a certain limited number of passers onto the oral assessment. And oral assessment is a rigorous day where usually in groups of 8, the candidates go into DC and they spend 5 to 6 hours going through the assessment process. And what the assessors are doing is they're using case studies, group evaluations, meaning the group does certain projects together and they're observed how they manage those projects. and then the standard interview where two people interview one candidate. And they go through this process, and at the end of the day, they decide whether or not you've passed. If you haven't passed, thank you for your time. If you have passed, then here's your score, and we're going to take that score and kind of set it aside for now, because you have to get your medical and security clearances. And this is really what slows the process down, is getting the medical and security clearances. When somebody agrees to join the U.S. Foreign Service, they're making a commitment to serving worldwide. It's called worldwide availability. My experience has been that when you're trying to enter, they're pretty serious about that. Once you're in, they take into account kind of common sense things. So the hard part is getting your medical and security clearance once you're in. The medical clearance is usually easier for most young people because you haven't gotten old enough to start having a lot of problems. And if you do have a medical issue already, then they've dealt with it, and they will make the decision whether or not you can still move forward with a full career or not. They have gotten very practical about medical clearances. So in the old days, if someone had, let's say, diabetes, they would have just been excluded. But in today's world, they look at it more like, can it be managed? So whatever the ailment is, you just got to come clean with med, and they will make the decisions based on that. They really are looking out for your best interest. I've seen it. Security clearances, not going to spend too much time because we could spend hours talking about security clearances, but the bottom line is tell the truth and let the cards fall where they may. They will find it out. You will be surprised how they will talk to other people and people you don't know, and they will find out lots of information. What they're looking for is to see if there's anything that may compromise your ethics, because the information that we have access to is a minimum top secret level. Once those clearances are received, which usually we tell everybody, plan for a year. Mine took 8 months, but we tell people a year is kind of on average. Some people it's sooner, some people it's longer. But once that the security and medical clearance are granted, they take everything that's been collected about the candidate and submit it to the suitability review panel. And think of this as like an admissions at a university. They make that binary decision. Yes, we want to make a conditional offer, or thank you for your time. If you're chosen, then what they do is they go back to that score you got on the oral assessment, and they put you on a career track register, which is nothing more than a list by career track. So they have a list for consular people, political, economic, PD, and management, and they take the highest scorers and put them in order on each of these registers. So when we have our A100 classes, which are our intake classes, where normally it's somewhere around 100 people based on our forecasted labor needs, and they happen probably about 3 times a year, they will go back to the career track register. And again, they're pulling from the register based on labor needs. They're not taking 20% from each list. So they may say, give us the top 17 management people, the top 23 consulate, the top 11 PD, and they go down that list and they make them an offer. And if the people are pulled off the register, they go and start their 6-week orientation class in Washington, D.C. And from the time that fanny hits the seats, doesn't matter if you're 24 or 44, if you're right out of undergrad, or you just spent 20 years in the military and you finished as a major and now you're becoming foreign service officer. From this point forward, our attitude is we will teach you what we need you to know, because you demonstrated strength in those 13 dimensions, and you have the ability to learn what we need to teach you, and you will go to the field and execute, and that will be your career. So how is it different for a specialist? Really, it's on the front end. Otherwise, it's the same. For the specialist, instead of testing through Pearson VUE, there will be a vacancy announcement at usajobs.gov, and I would encourage everybody to set up an account there as well as on careers.state.gov. So it'll ping you whenever certain positions open up. They'll say, this vacancy announcement is listed for facility managers. And then when you click on it at careers.state.gov, it'll take you to the vacancy announcement at usajobs.gov. Whatever it says there, that's the answer. So even if Alan tells you, you can do this, if you look at that vacancy announcement and it says something different, you go with that. because that is what they are using to make all of their decisions. This goes on to the QEP. QEP, again, chooses who goes on to the orals. And here's the other difference. In the process of the orals, the specialists have to take a competency exam. Remember, the generalists don't have to, because our attitude is, we'll teach you whatever you need to know. Well, we teach our specialists in their career, but really the expectation is they have to demonstrate during the orals that they have skills in whatever they're being hired for. So this is not like an SAT level sort of assessment on your skill set, but it does make sure that if you say you are an IT professional, you're going to have to know IT stuff or you won't pass that exam. After that, process is the same. So I have this ad. I had to pull this out when I took this position because back in 2004, I saw this. And I was working down in Boca Raton, Florida, and I had known people who were in the Foreign Service before. It wasn't like this was alien to me, but I never thought of myself being in the Foreign Service. I always thought I was a management finance type person. And what you don't see written here is basically that this is the Secretary of State at the time, Colin Powell, saying, hey, we're looking for people from all different careers, especially administrative people. So I said, I guess I'm an administrative person. So I went to careers.state.gov on a Saturday and I read through it and I saw there's something called a career assessment or a quiz, and you put all your information in there about what you like to do, and it will come back and tell you which of the 5 career tracks we think you're the best fit for. And I thought it would be management and economic. And it was like an 80% fit for management, around 25 for consular, and everything else wasn't even measurable. So I've discovered that tool is very good. So I would encourage everybody, if you're going to talk to your local DIR, go through careers.state.gov, learn it, and take that quiz. Well, I did that. 3 hours later, I said, I think I want to do this. So any married man would know what I'm about to say. I said, Marcella, would you come here? And my wife looked over my shoulder and I said, what do you think about spending the next 20 years or so traveling the world, going places where we really don't know the language that well? We'll be uprooting our daughters, going from school to school to school. We won't be back in the States for vacations sometimes. We might miss events that are happening with our family. What do you think about something like this? And she said, yeah, let's do it. So from that day on Saturday, I made it my mission to join the U.S. Foreign Service, and I've had a fantastic career. So I talked about some of the motivations that people have. In my case, it was very family oriented because I'd been out working a long time, but other people have different motivations. Many people are motivated because they're being on the front line of service. So essentially, look at TV. If you see breaking news, something's blowing up in this country, and you see everybody running away, who do you think the one is running towards? It's going to be someone probably from that embassy, because they have to start sending information back to Washington. We're spread across more places than DOD. So Department of Defense may get there, but we're going to be the ones there first. And that's kind of exciting, especially if you're an adrenaline junkie. Public service, helping Americans overseas. You will have ample opportunity officially and unofficially to help Americans overseas. It's many times being a consular officer is kind of like being in an emergency room in a hospital, where you have to help somebody who's in dire need at that time. Other times it's not as stressful, but you still get the opportunities to do it. Career-long training and academic growth, including foreign languages. If someone enters with a foreign language, that's good. It can make life easier because that is a requirement for an officer. But if you don't, you know what? We'll teach you. We have at our school, Foreign Service Institute, a cadre of native-born speakers, and they will teach you whatever language you need to know to do your job. Job challenge and work diversity. Every 2 to 3 years, you're doing a different assignment. And trust me, compared to the private world, you are going to get some curveballs thrown at you that your colleagues back in the States would say, oh, that never happened to me. Benefits. If you're a money type thinker, when you're overseas, Uncle Sam pays for your housing, they pay your utilities, they pay to ship your car over, they pay for a lot of stuff. So you can live very, very well when you're overseas. And again, that global lifestyle, traveling the world as a diplomat. I remember being in the Buenos Aires airport and I saw someone carrying a duffel bag that had the logo of Department of State on it. I went over, started talking to them. We had about 5 people in common. So it's a little click, but it's a fun click. I'm not going to go through this. This is just examples of places I've been in my career with the U.S. Department of State. So Uncle Sam has paid for me to go to these places, and I could probably talk at least a half hour about each one of them. Let's talk student programs, then we'll go to our Q&A. All right, our flagship fellowships are the Wrangell and Pickering Fellowship programs. To be a competitor for this, it's a 2-year graduate fellowship. So someone would have to be a graduating senior to qualify, meaning that they would start their fellowship the following September academic year, or they could have already graduated and be out doing something, and now they want to go back. So it's not unusual for us to have people who compete for this who've been out in the work world for 2 to 3 years, or with the Peace Corps or something similar. Love Peace Corps volunteers, by the way. As far as what the award is, $42,000 per year. That includes tuition, room, board, books, fees, and stipend, and also 2 paid internships during the summer. All our applicants must be U.S. citizens, and that's pretty much for everything, because they do have to get security clearances, and those are requirements. Have to meet the medical and security requirements, and kind of like ROTC in the military, there's a minimum 5-year service commitment. The reality is that most people who come through these programs stay a minimum of 20 years. You can find out more about at wrangellprogram.org and Pickering Fellows. So I just mentioned these 2 programs together. What are the differences? It really comes down to the internships. Wrangell Fellowships, named after Congressman Wrangell, have their first internship on Capitol Hill, and their second internship would be at an embassy abroad. Whereas the Pickering Fellowship has their first internship at the State Department, and the second would be at an embassy abroad. That's really the only difference between these 2 programs. And their deadlines close are usually in the October timeframe. So it's good for anybody who's going to be a senior or higher to start doing their research now, because once the window opens, you're not going to have a lot of time to get all the recommendations and everything you need. So start doing your research now if it looks like something you would be interested in. Foreign Affairs IT program started in 2017, and it is a copy of the Wrangell and Pickering programs. We have this because we have such a dire need for IT professionals. So the difference in this program and the Wrangell and Pickering programs are essentially that the FATE can be used for undergrad or grad. So if someone is currently a sophomore and they want to qualify to be a FATE fellow and they get it, they'd be able to use the fellowship for their junior and senior year to get their BS in a computer related or IT related field. If somebody's graduating senior, or they've already graduated and out in the work world and they want to use the fellowship for a master's degree, 2-year master's degree, they can do that as well. Again, citizen at the time of application, funding's a little bit lower, but the reality is this normally meets the needs based on the schools we work with. The internship is at Department of State, the first one. The second one is abroad, same 5-year commitment. And the deadline for this one is later. It's normally in January, the end of January. So our deadline, our people just finished the FATE Fellowship submission in January, and they're going through the process now of deciding who they're going to call in for interviews. Whereas our Wrangell and Pickering Fellows, they've already been chosen. Wrangell Summer Enrichment Program. This is a different program, and this is for undergrad. This is for students who are learning. And the great thing is, I call this the steal of all our student programs. There is no service commitment. The students, we call them Wrangell Scholars. The scholars go and normally would stay on Howard University campus in the dormitories for 6 weeks, and it's paid for. And they take 2 classes, and those classes are Howard University classes, which means that your registrar may accept them, so you might be able to get 6 hours of credit. At the time of the application, again, must be U.S. citizens, at least sophomore status, and meet all the requirements. They're going to be taking these classes, learning about foreign policy, economics, writing. They get to go on these cool field trips, going to visit the other foreign affairs agencies, Commerce, CIA, whomever is an international affairs agency. The program covers the cost of tuition, travel, housing, and they get paid $3,200 for essentially learning. So they're being prepped. What do you think their chances are getting a Wrangell or Pickering Fellowship when they graduate? It's just gone up like that because they're being prepped for it. So this is such a great program because you're learning what you need to know to basically either take the test and succeed or compete as a Wrangell or Pickering Fellow. Some of the other student opportunities are the U.S. Student Internship Program. This is our classic Department of State internship program. It is unpaid, and that's the catch. It is in DC, few other places in the US, but mostly DC, or at embassies or consulates abroad. What I always tell people is usually you can apply to 3 different internships. That I always tell students, pick at least one that's domestic, because everybody's bidding on Buenos Aires or Madrid or Paris or something like that. Not as many people bid on DC because it doesn't sound as exciting. But the reality is if you get an internship in DC, you're seeing the big picture of everything that goes on. Whereas if you go to an embassy abroad, you're going on your own dime and you have to pay for your own housing. Sometimes they find ways of helping you overseas, but it's not guaranteed with housing. And when you are learning, you're learning great things about being in an embassy, but you're not getting the big picture, you're getting a more limited view. So nothing's wrong with going overseas, but it is more competitive. And I think that being an intern in DC in the summer is loads of fun. It is just good times for young people in DC during the summer. USFSIP is a paid internship program that's a 2-year program. So you have to be a current sophomore or junior, meaning that you would have 2 years as this intern and you are paid. You have to have demonstrated financial need. And this is the big catch for this program. It's extremely competitive. They actually open and close it very quickly. So the window of opportunity to apply is only about 3 weeks, whereas the others are about 6 to 7 weeks. But the key thing is for the USFSIP, you have to have demonstrated financial need. It's essentially another program, kind of like the Wrangell Enrichment Program, where you're being prepped to become a Foreign Service officer specialist. The Pathways programs are oriented more towards civil servants. So they're taking their interns and trying to prepare them for careers in civil service. Now, that doesn't mean you're forced to go in the civil service. It just means that's the intent of the program. The Pathways programs are paid programs. So undergraduates and graduate students can qualify for Pathways paid internships. Again, extremely competitive because everybody wants to get an internship that's paid. So if you do, if you're interested in these are not only Department of State. Pathways is federal government. So you can find these internships at other agencies as well. I would go to USA Jobs and put in the notifications. So you'll get pinged whenever this opens up at any of the agencies. And the reason that's important is each of these vacancy announcements will have an open and close date on it. But the fine print many times says, or until filled. So what they may do is they may say, we're going to accept 500 applications. If those applications come in within 24 hours, they'll close. So it doesn't matter if it says it's supposed to be open for 30 days. If they hit that number, they will close. And with the Pathways, that happens a lot. So people do get their feelings hurt many times because they get the notification on Pathways and then a week later they're applying and realize it's closed on. The Pathways Recent Graduates Program is one for people who graduated within the last 2 years and they want to become a paid intern. It's more like a career development program for 1 year. And people who finish this program successfully have good ratings, may convert to the non-competitive civil service. So what that simply means is they can compete for jobs as civil servants that are limited to people who are working with the federal government. So they wouldn't have to compete with outsiders trying to join the government. which means the pool of people they're competing with is a much smaller pool. Again, civil servants can compete to become foreign service later on. So if someone becomes an intern through pathways, nothing's stopping them from competing in the future to become a foreign service officer or specialist. And as a matter of fact, we have a lot of people who do that. The other programs we're going to talk about quickly is VSFS, Virtual Student Federal Service Internship. And this is a program that, again, is US federal government, not just Department of State. And this one opens and closes during the summer. So you definitely want to put a reminder in. It will normally open on July 1, close on July 31. The interviews happen in August, and then the student starts their internship when their academic year begins, and it continues for their academic year. This is a program that was built to be virtual. So it's always been the student committing 10 hours a week to working on project-oriented business. Please excuse the dog, someone's outside. So the good thing about this is, I'll give you a real life example. I would meet with my intern every Monday, and I would tell her what the assignment is going to be for the week. She and I both knew I couldn't really expect more than 10 hours of work from her on this project. It's not busy work because I need someone to do it. So if she wouldn't do it, I would have to do it. And then the following Monday, she would either deliver it or she'd give me an update on what the status is. And we'd be going through this every single week. So what this essentially does is has built-in mentoring for those students who take advantage of it. And you can really stuff your resume because you are doing work that someone really needs to do. Again, put the notification in because it opens and closes during the summer, and you can be, as long as you're going to be a student during that academic year, you qualify. So here's a little fine little thing that people don't realize. You could actually be a high school senior, which means that when you apply, if you would be a freshman when the program starts, you can actually qualify. Those are hard to get as a high school senior because you're competing, but it is possible. The last thing I'll mention is if you go to state.gov/students, that will take you to our page talking about our Bureau of Educational and Cultural Affairs. These are programs that are not necessarily intern type programs, but they're exchange programs, foreign study abroad programs that the Department of State supports, sometimes financially. And what you can do is expand the skills, so you're getting better at those 13 dimensions we talked about. It's not something where you're going to be learning about actually being in the foreign service, but you're developing those other skills by studying abroad. So that is it. We're going to go to Q&A. The key takeaways: careers.state.gov, read. And also take a look at usajobs.gov. I would encourage people to go start looking now, even if you're a freshman, because you'll start to see what's in a vacancy announcement and what they're looking for. So any of you who would like to talk to me, I hold office hours once a week. I can be contacted at dirsouth@state.gov. And the first thing I'm going to say is, did you go to careers.state.gov and do your due diligence? And what did that career assessment quiz say? So you'll be able to understand my answers, and it will be a productive meeting. So with that, I'm going to open the floor to any questions. And we have a fairly full group, so please raise your hand so we can field the questions that way. I don't see any hands up. Ms. Huntley, do you see any?
I don't see any hands up either. You can also put your question in the chat if you'd like.
Yeah, if you can people unmute themselves and just talk? If you can do it that way. I see yes in the chat, but I don't see any hands up.
That was to an earlier question.
Okay.
Okay, so Ross Meadow raised his hand.
So Russ, why don't you go right ahead and unmute yourself and ask your question.
First off, how are you? Thank you for your talk today. I appreciate that. So I'm actually looking at the Fiat fellowship right now, and I see where you have to agree to a 5-year commitment. Typically, like with that 5-year commitment, like what are your assignments like, and how long are you in like various countries or wherever if you're on different assignments?
So keep in mind, you're talking about the Wrangell and Pickering Fellowship, those fellowships, you are entering the U.S. Foreign Service. So once that Fanny hits the seat as in your A100 class, it's no different than if you were hired off the street going through the regular testing process. The only difference is if someone else went through the regular testing process, they don't have any commitment. The fellow does. That's literally the only difference. So you get the same training. You would normally, what we do is we have two-year tours, and they leave an extra year for study because you get a lot of training in the first 2 tours. So that gives you 5 years, and that's one reason they have that 5-year commitment. The other thing is that we have what's called tenuring, and tenuring to us means that you have demonstrated that you have what it takes to serve a full 20-year minimum career with us. And so we will do what's called tenuring you. If you get tenured, then we're not going to fire you without cause. We'll only fire you under 2 conditions. 1, you do something, or B, you do what's called tick out, which is basically you don't get promoted over long periods of time. You just kind of languish there. But that's not that common. So the bottom line is you would then enter, you would get your first assignment. It's going to require some training. So you go across the river, get your training, get paid while you're doing this. Then you go do your 2-year assignment. Your next assignment is going to be probably another 2-year assignment, and you may need some more training. So you get that training, go overseas, do that next 2-year assignment. You should assume that's going to take 5 years. Between year 3 and year 5, you're going to need to get tenured. And as long as you get tenured, you've met that 5-year commitment, you can go, leave, and do whatever you want in life. And 90% of the fellows keep right on going because they like what they're doing.
Thank you.
Sure. I see a question from Luke. And in terms of placement, do we have control? This is a very good question and something a lot of people don't understand. When we have our assignments, the assumption is, I always speak in 20-year to just make it simple, kind of like the military. They say 20 years. You can stay until you turn 65, but the expectation is you're going to spend probably 2/3 or more of your career overseas. That's what our expectation is. There's no rule that says that, but we have some rules in place that kind of force you to go overseas. So some people go overseas, come back to the States, go overseas, come back to the States. Other people just go overseas and they stay there. And we actually had to change the rules because some people wouldn't come home. They were over there 18, 19 years and only came home to see their family. So after your first assignment, you have a lot of control over where you go. Your first assignment, you get a list and your classmates get the same list. There are 80 people in your class. There are 80 posts on that list. So everybody's going to get something from that list. We're gentle people. We're not like the military who says, go there. We have a discussion with you. Do you have a family? Do you speak a language? Oh, you do. Do you want another language? We'll teach you another language. So we try to find a fit for you for that very first 2-year tour. After that, it's on you. So now it's computerized. You'll see the lists and you click on the ones you want to compete for, and that's pretty much the process. So when it comes to your assignments abroad, we do have rules in place that are going to force you to spend a certain amount of time abroad. But as far as where you go, it's pretty much you're competing for opportunities every 2 to 3 years when you're trying to get your next assignment. And you have to make decisions because, hey, if you take this one position, you're probably going to get promoted after that. If you take another position, you're probably not. So you're going to have to decide what's more important. I go somewhere I really want to go, or I get that promotion. Question about citizenship. It does not matter if, Okay, no, legal permanent residents are not citizens. They are legal permanent residents, and there is a distinction. So if a person is a US citizen, they will qualify. This is a requirement to get the clearance. That's the whole reason. To get a top secret clearance, you have to be a US citizen. It does not matter if you were born in the US or you're naturalized. That, they don't care. So that's a security related question, and you do have to be a US citizen. Next question I see down here. What are some of these year-long assignments you're talking about, 2 or 3 year projects? Probably misunderstood me. I was talking about VSFS when I was talking about when they work through the academic year and they're getting assignments. So the other thing you might be talking about is your assignments overseas. Think of us like the military. Anybody who knows military, my father was Air Force. So what would happen is every 2 or 3 years, you got to get up and go somewhere. And they would have a list of jobs and they would send my father to wherever these jobs were. One of them was Vietnam. So in our case with the US Department of State, we do the same thing. We don't send somebody to a country and they stay there 5, 6 years. They know when, before they even go over there, when they're going to be leaving. And the job itself is designated as a 1, 2, or 3 year assignment. 80% of them are going to be 3 year assignments, and the other 20% are going to be 1 year or 2 year assignments. 1 year assignments are usually in places like Iraq, some dangerous places in Pakistan. 2 year assignments tend to be in places that have other issues. They're not war zones, but it's hard life there. They may not have quality education, so your family can't go, or some other restrictions that make it more difficult. So the general concept is every 3 years, you're going to be competing for your next assignment. Mine were Mexico, Ecuador, and Dubai, UAE, or you're going to be competing for a domestic job, meaning you're working in the States. Those are normally 2 year assignments, but sooner or later, if you stay in the States, they're going to force you to go overseas. Maybe add you in LinkedIn. Yeah, I'm in LinkedIn. You can go ahead and add me, but the reality is I have so many emails I have to monitor and other ways of communication that I really don't check LinkedIn. That's the reality. But the good thing is, if you want to talk to me, do your research in careers.state.gov, shoot me an email to dirsouth@state.gov, and we can set up office hours and talk to you about your career intentions and anything that's unique to your situation. Anybody else have anything? Let's see. I see something in the Q&A about military benefits and family members. If anybody has made out in my career, it was the daughter you saw who I was standing there, and she was standing there at the UN. And that's an example. So here she is. This is when she was a senior and she was in high school and she wanted to go looking at colleges, and she naively thought that I was going to let her go to a private school in New York. I said, oh, you can go on a trip. I'm not sending you to Fordham. You can go on a trip. Oh, by the way, I know someone at the UN. Do you want them to maybe show you around? So that's one of the benefits of being in that little community. You get to know people. And when we're abroad, she went to some ritzy schools. I mean, I would not have been able to afford these schools if I was in the States. And for example, she went to one school where their service project was to fly from Dubai to South Africa, and they spent 10 days. She went to Soweto and did work there. This is their service project. You know, they don't do this at the local school in anywhere in the States I know of. So the experiences she had were just out of this world. And my spouse as well, learning languages. My daughter passed me within 3 months as far as her Spanish skills, because she was a kid and her brains just absorb languages when you're younger. So yes, the benefits for the family members are really much better than they are than anything you could imagine if you were a family member back in the States. What school in Dubai? American School of Dubai. You went to ASD? Yep, you went to ASD. Now they have another school right next to it they thought was going to compete with it, but ASD is still hanging strong because that name, American School of Dubai, people in Dubai know if my kid graduates from ASD, The US universities really respect that. And that's the way it is in most schools abroad. People who don't know military, they have what's called DOD schools, which are defense agency schools. But we have our own programs. We don't have our own schools. We work with other schools in those countries. And age range. Officially, you have to be 21 by the time of commissioning, meaning your fanny would hit the seat, and 59 and a half would be on the upper end. So that's really the only age limitation. There are age limitations that are specific to DS jobs. You can't be as old in DS, diplomatic security, but for all the other, that is the age range. I never tell people when to apply as far as age or experience. What I always tell them is go through that list of those 13 dimensions and think to yourself, when, not if, when I'm in the orals and they ask me a question that's related to one of those 13 dimensions, what experience am I going to be able to draw from to answer their question? If the answer is, I have 8 good answers, well, you're probably not going to make it. So what I would encourage you to do is whatever you're doing in life, you can be a student, you can be in grad school, you can be working, you can be a volunteer with the Peace Corps. Oh, I love them because they go through and they have experiences with each of those 13 dimensions. So the bottom line is when you feel like you're you have a qualified, legitimate knowledge and experience with those 13 dimensions, that's what I would say. You're probably competitive at that point. And it's not unusual for people who go through the testing process to take 2 or 3 tries. It is kind of like the SATs a little bit where you do learn as you go. So you might wash out along the way, but you'll be stronger for it the second or third time. The record I think I heard was one guy who had to go 8 tries. And the irony is he had his PhD, he was a professor at a Big 12 school. So it's not always intelligence, it's just weaknesses in certain dimensions. And you have to make sure you have all those covered. Another ASD person, all right. See, I'm telling you, the international world, you get to know people from situations like this, where you just happen to, you went there, I went there, you were in Ecuador, I didn't know I was in Ecuador too. And that's what happens, and that's a fun part of being in the international community. All right, I'm kind of now just talking a little bit. Anything else that people have for me? Okay, in my 60 seconds, what people didn't ask me about, but they should have asked me about was, hey, security clearances. What are usually the problems people have? And the answer is marijuana and money mismanagement. All right, you can't use drugs. So if you're using it, stop. They'll find out. Even if you are living in a state where it's legal, stop. Because it's not a federal law, those are state laws. So don't do it. And if you go through the process of being interviewed by our agents to get your clearance, tell them the truth, because sometimes the lie is worse than the sin. Many times people won't use hard drugs, but they'll smoke marijuana and they think it's not a big deal. And that could be what keeps you from getting your security clearance. So the bottom line is, if you're looking for a career in the federal government that is going to require a security clearance, just don't use drugs. And when you're asked about it, you tell the truth. You don't babble, you answer their question, and then stop. And they will ask you the next question, or they may not ask you the next question. They know what they're doing. But the bottom line is they will find out. The other thing is money mismanagement. A lot of young people, they don't pay all their debts because they don't look at it as a big deal. So let's say the landlord says your share of the rent is $1,000 and you're $50 short one month. So you go to the landlord and say, hey, I'm 50 short. Landlord says, oh, all right, well, don't worry about it, not a big deal. And you go on with life, right? Well, when they go back and ask that landlord, does she always pay her rent? And he says, oh, she's pretty good. One time she shorted me 50. To him, it's not a big deal. To you, it wasn't a big deal. To us, co-signing. If your parents co-sign for something, do they actually have to pay for it, or are you paying for it? The bottom line is I have seen very qualified people who did not get their clearances for one of those two reasons. Those are the two most common ones, is managing their finances and specifically marijuana. Anything else? Otherwise, I think I've covered everything.
Well, I'd certainly like to thank you very much, Alan. This has certainly been informative, and I'm sure our students have gotten a lot from it. So thank you for joining us today.
And again, thank you for having me.
Have a good day, everyone.
Bye-bye.